For 3,000 years, the Galactic Concord had whispered about a species that once walked among the stars. And these whispers had become legends the parents told their children when the lights went dark and fear crept into young hearts. The humans, they called them. And the name itself carried a weight that made even the bravest warriors pause ancient records. Spoke of bipedal creatures from a small blue world on the edge of the Orion Arm. Beings who laughed when death came knocking and who waged wars not for territory or resources but for ideas and principles that other species could not understand. They were called the Ghost Builders because they constructed stations and colonies that still drifted through space like monuments to a forgotten age. They were called the Mad Wanderers because they explored regions of space that no sane species would enter. They were called the ones who refused to kneel because no empire had ever truly conquered them. But humanity had gone silent, and silence in the void usually meant extinction. Ambassador Vethra of the Selenari Empire stood before the High Council of the Galactic Concord, his 4 eyes scanning the gathered delegates from 62 different species who filled the massive chamber with their various forms and colors and sounds. The chamber hummed with a tension that Vethra had never felt before in all his years of diplomatic service, and he knew that the words he was about to speak would change everything. The Keth Volume Dominion has declared total war upon all member species of this Concord, Vethra announced, and his voice trembled despite his best efforts to remain calm. Their swarm fleets number in the millions, and our intelligence suggests they will reach the inner systems within 3 cycles. Panic rippled through the assembly like a wave crashing against rocks, and delegates began shouting over one another in a chaos of languages and translator. Static. The Keth Volume were not just another aggressive species seeking expansion, for they were devourers who consumed worlds whole and left nothing behind but barren rock and eternal silence. They did not negotiate. They did not trade, and they did not take prisoners. They simply fed. Vethra raised his hands and called for order. But the panic had taken hold, and he could see the fear in eyes and sensors and chemical receptors across the chamber. What forces do we have? Demanded Delegate Corax of the Thrin Federation, his metallic voice cutting through the noise. Our combined fleets number approximately 800,000 vessels, Vethra replied, but the Keth Volume command over 12 million. The chamber fell silent at those numbers, for every delegate understood what they meant. They were outnumbered 15 to 1, and the Kethvol had never lost a war. Elder Morath of the Veluxi Collective rose slowly from his seat, and the movement drew attention because Morath was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species. His form was withered and bent with the weight of centuries, but his mind remained sharp as the blade of a plasma cutter. And when he spoke, the entire chamber listened. There is one option we have never considered, Morris said, and his voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. Speak. Elder, Vethra replied, and he felt a strange flutter of something that might have been hope. We must find the humans. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming as laughter erupted from dozens of delegates while others made sounds of mockery and disbelief. Humans. Legends, spat Corax, and his contempt was obvious in every syllable. They are fairy tales told to frighten larvae and entertain children, and they died out millennia ago if they ever existed at all. Other delegates nodded in agreement, and someone called out that Morath had finally lost his ancient mind. But Elder Morath did not waver, and he stood firm against the ridicule with the patience of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. I have seen the archives that your governments have hidden from the public, Morath said, and the laughter began to fade. I have walked through their abandoned stations and touched the walls they built with their own hands. The chamber grew quiet as Morath continued. They did not die out, and they did not go extinct as we have told ourselves for comfort. He paused and let his words sink in. They retreated behind a wall of silence, and they sealed their borders so completely that we convinced ourselves they had never existed at all. Vethra felt cold spreading through his body as he processed what the elder was saying. Why would they help us? He asked quietly, and the question hung in the air like smoke. We never helped them when they needed us. Elder Morath turned to face the ambassador, and there was something in his ancient eyes that looked like shame. We did far worse than ignore them, Morris said, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We hunted them across the stars when they were young and weak, and we exploited their worlds and their people, and we drove them to the very edge of extinction before they finally found the strength to push back. The silence that fell upon the chamber was complete. Our ancestors committed atrocities against their species that we have erased from our histories. Morath continued. We burned their colonies and killed their children. And when they begged for peace, we demanded their surrender and their servitude. Vethra could not speak, and he saw the same shock reflected in the faces of delegates all around him. They fought back with everything they had, Morath said, and they won. But the cost was so terrible that they chose to disappear, rather than continue living among species who had shown them nothing but cruelty. Then we are doomed, someone whispered. And the words seemed to echo through the chamber. If the humans remembered what had been done to them, they would never help the Concord. They would watch from their hidden worlds as the Kethful consumed everything. And they would call it justice. But Elder Morath shook his head slowly. The humans were many things, he said, and they were capable of great violence and great cruelty when pushed to their limits. But the archives also spoke of something else. He looked around the chamber at the terrified delegates. They spoke of compassion and mercy and a strange, stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Vethra stepped forward. You think they might help us despite everything we did to them? Morath was quiet for a long moment. I think that if any species in this galaxy would choose mercy over revenge, it would be the humans. He turned and began walking toward the exit, but someone will have to find them first, and someone will have to look them in the eyes and ask for forgiveness. He paused at the door. The question is whether any of us have the courage to try. The chamber remained silent long after he left, and Vethra knew that everything had changed somewhere beyond the borders of known space, hidden behind 3,000 years of silence. Humanity waited, and the galaxy was about to learn whether legends could forgive. Commander Lyra Sen gripped the controls of her small diplomatic vessel as the ship entered the region that star charts marked with warnings and symbols of death. They called this place the Dead Reach, and no signal had emerged from its darkness in over 2,000 years. Ships that crossed into this space simply vanished, and the few probes that had been sent returned nothing but static before they too went silent. Lyra had been chosen for this mission because she was expendable, and she understood this truth without bitterness because someone had to go and she had volunteered. Her crew of 12 sat at their stations behind her, and she could feel their fear filling the cabin like a living thing. Approaching the boundary, reported Navigator Het, and his scales had gone pale with terror. Sensors are picking up strange readings ahead. Lyra nodded and kept her eyes fixed on the view screen. Take us in. The moment they crossed the invisible line that marked the edge of the Dead Reach, everything changed in ways that Lyra could not have imagined. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as sensors detected movement on every side, and the darkness that had seemed empty moments before now blazed with 1,000 points of light. These were not stars, and they were not asteroids. They were ships, warships of a design that no one in the Galactic Concord had ever seen, surrounded the small diplomatic vessel in an instant, and Lyra counted dozens before she stopped because the numbers did not matter. Each ship was sleek and angular with lines that spoke of speed and power. and they bristled with weapons that defied anything in the Concord database. A voice crackled through the communication array, speaking in perfect Concord standard, but with an accent that had not been heard in living memory. Unknown vessel. You have entered restricted human space, and you are ordered to identify yourselves and state your purpose immediately. Lyra's heart pounded so hard, she thought they might burst through her chest. You have 30 seconds to comply. She forced herself to breathe and reached for the communication controls with trembling claws. This is Ambassador Lyra Sen of the Galactic Concord, she said, and she fought to keep her voice steady. We come in peace seeking aid from the human species. She paused and gathered her courage. The Keth volume. Dominion has declared war upon all free species in the galaxy, and we face complete extinction without help. Silence stretched across the void for what felt like an eternity. Then a different voice came through the speakers, deeper and calmer than the first, carrying a weight of authority that made Lyra's spine straighten. You ignored us for 3,000 years and called us monsters and legends and lies. The voice paused. You said we were better off, forgotten, and that the galaxy was safer without us. Lyra closed her eyes and felt the shame of generations pressing down upon her shoulders. We were wrong, she said simply, because there was nothing else to say. Another pause stretched out, longer than the first, and Lyra wondered if they would simply destroy her ship and return to their silence. Hold your position and do not deviate from your current location, the voice finally said. A representative will board your vessel to speak with you directly. The communication cut off, and Lyra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. What do we do? Asked Het, his voice shaking. We wait, Lyra replied, and we hope that the legends about human mercy were true. 20 minutes passed like 20 years before the airlock cycled, and the indicator showed that someone was coming aboard. Lyra had studied every ancient image and recording she could find in the days before this mission, and she thought she understood what humans looked like. She thought she was prepared for this moment. She was not. The human who stepped through the airlock door was neither the monster of old propaganda nor the divine figure of whispered legend. He was simply present in a way that filled the entire room with his existence. Stood at average height by human standards, with brown hair cut short against his skull, and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations or medals, except for a small patch on his shoulder that showed a blue circle with green and brown shapes. Earth, Lyra realized, and she felt something shift inside her at the sight of that tiny image. I am Captain Ben Cortez of the United Earth Defense Fleet, the human said, and his voice was quiet but carried weight that pressed against Lyra like gravity. You wanted to speak with humanity, so speak. Lyra stood and bowed her head in the gesture of respect that her species used for those they honored. Thank you for receiving us, Captain Cortez. Ben Cortez did not bow in return, and his expression remained unreadable as he studied her with those storm-gray eyes. Tell me about this war. And so Lyra told him everything. She spoke of the Keth volume swarms that had emerged from the outer rim 2 cycles ago and swept through colony after colony like a plague of locusts. She described the billions who had already died and the worlds that had been stripped bare of all life. She explained how the combined fleets of the Concord had been shattered in their first engagement with the enemy, and how the remaining forces were falling back toward the core systems in desperate retreat through it all. Captain Cortez listened without interruption and without visible reaction when she finished. He leaned back in his chair and studied her face. 3,000 years ago, your ancestors burned our colony on Kepler 22b in a single night, he said, and his voice remained calm despite the horror of his words. 14 million humans died in that attack, including women and children and families who had done nothing except try to build new homes among the stars. Lyra felt shame crawl through her like ice water in her veins. We remember every name, Cortez continued, every face and every child who never had the chance to grow up. Because humanity does not forget. He stood and walked to the viewport where distant stars glittered against the black void. But we also remember who we are. He turned back to face her. We are the species that looked into the endless darkness of space and said we would not be afraid. His voice grew stronger. We are the ones who crawled out of mud and split atoms and reached for the stars, even when everyone told us it was impossible. He stepped closer to Lyra. We have every reason to hate you and every justification to let the Keth volume burn this galaxy to ashes. While we watched from safety, Lyra could not look away from his eyes. But that is not who we are, Ben Cortez said. Because humanity learned long ago that revenge is a poison that destroys the one who drinks it. Hope flickered in Lyra's chest like a candle flame in darkness. You will help us? Cortez shook his head slowly. I cannot make that decision alone. But I will take your request to the Council of Earth, and I will tell them what you have told me. He paused, and I will advocate for intervention. Because some things are more important than old grudges. Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. What happens now? Now you wait here while I return to my people, Cortez said. And he turned toward the airlock. And you pray that 3,000 years has been long enough for humanity to learn forgiveness. He paused at the door and looked back at her. But understand this clearly, Ambassador. His eyes hardened. If we go to war, we do not go halfway. And we do not stop until it is finished. He stepped through the airlock and was gone, leaving Lyra alone with her crew and a fragile hope that the legends might save them all. The Council of Earth convened in the great chamber that had been carved deep beneath the red surface of Mars over 2,000 years ago. And the weight of history pressed down upon everyone who gathered there. Representatives from every human world attended this emergency session. Some present in physical form, while others appeared as holographic projections that shimmered in the recycled air. The debate had raged for hours and showed no signs of stopping. Admiral Kate Mercer stood at the center of the chamber and watched the arguments fly back and forth like weapons in a battle she could not control. She had commanded the United Earth Defense Fleet for 30 years. And in all that time, she had prayed she would never have to use the terrible power that waited in the hidden shipyards. Her silver hair was pulled back tight against her skull, and her eyes were sharp as polished steel. And she waited for the right moment to speak. We cannot risk exposing ourselves after all this time, shouted Representative Howard Lang from the Europa delegation. Our ancestors sacrificed everything to build this sanctuary, and we have no obligation to help the species that nearly destroyed us. Murmurs of agreement rippled through one side of the chamber. They came to us begging for help, countered Representative Maria Santos from the Luna settlement. And turning our backs on billions of innocent people because of crimes committed by their ancestors is not justice, but cowardice. The arguments grew louder and more heated as the hours passed. Chancellor Danny Oakes sat in the central chair and listened to both sides with the patience that had made him the leader of humanity for the past 12 years. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and gray hair that had once been black. And he believed deeply in the principles that humanity had forged during the long years of exile. But he also understood the fear that drove those who wanted to remain hidden. The vote stands at exactly 50% on each side, announced the counting officer. And the chamber fell into tense silence. A time meant no action. And no action meant humanity would remain in hiding while the galaxy burned. Admiral Mercer stepped forward and raised her hand to request permission to speak. Chancellor Oaks nodded. "You have the floor." Admiral Kate Mercer had prepared a long speech full of strategic analysis and military projections. But standing there in that moment, she realized that numbers and tactics were not what her people needed to hear. She activated the display screen behind her and began showing images. "This is the colony world of Desser Prime," she said. And the image showed a beautiful green planet covered in forests and oceans. 12 billion members of the Veluxi species lived there 6 months ago. She changed the image. And now the planet was brown and dead, with its atmosphere stripped away and its surface scarred by massive gouges where the Keth volume had fed. "This is Desser Prime today." She showed more images as the chamber watched in silence. Colony after colony appeared on the screen. Each one transformed from a living world into a barren rock. Children of species that humanity had never met stared out from archived photographs, their eyes full of hope for futures that would never come. "The Keth volume do not negotiate and they do not stop," Mercer said. "They are not interested in territory or resources or power, because they are driven only by an endless hunger that can never be satisfied." She turned to face the assembly. "Our intelligence suggests that when they finish consuming the Galactic Concord, they will begin searching for new feeding grounds." She paused to let that sink in. "The Dead Reach has hidden us for 3,000 years, but nothing stays hidden forever. And eventually, the Keth volume will find us." Representative Lang stood up. "Then we should strengthen our defenses and prepare for that day." "Isolation is not survival," Mercer replied. And her voice grew stronger. "It is merely delayed extinction." She walked among the representatives and looked into their faces one by one. "Our ancestors hid because they had no choice after the wars nearly destroyed us. But we have a choice now." She returned to the center of the chamber. "We can cower in the dark and wait for death to find us. Or we can stand up and walk into the light and remind the universe that humanity still lives." Chancellor Oaks leaned forward in his chair. "What exactly are you proposing, Admiral?" "I am proposing that we honor the best parts of who we have always been," Mercer said. "We are the species that went to the moon because it was there. And we are the species that cured diseases and fed the hungry and reached across impossible distances to shake hands with strangers." Her voice rang through the chamber. "Yes, we have also been cruel and violent and foolish. But we have always tried to be better than our worst impulses." She pointed at the images of dead worlds that still glowed on the display. "Those people out there are facing extinction. And they came to us because somewhere in the depths of their fear they remembered that humans once stood for something greater than themselves." She lowered her hand. "Say we prove them right." The chamber was silent. As her words settled into the Phologian hearts of every person present, Chancellor Oaks rose slowly from his chair. "Admiral Mercer has made her case," he said. "And now I will make mine." He walked to the center of the chamber and stood beside the Admiral. "I have read the histories that our ancestors tried to hide. And I know the terrible things that were done to our people in the early days of expansion." His voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. "I also know that holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die." He turned in a slow circle to address everyone. "We have spent 3,000 years becoming the people we always wanted to be. And now the universe is giving us a chance to show what that means." He raised his hand. "I vote yes for intervention. And I ask each of you to search your hearts and do the same." One by one, the representatives began to vote. The lights on the great board shifted from red to green as the count changed from a tie to a majority when the final vote was cast. The board showed unanimous approval. Admiral Mercer felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was tight. Chancellor Oaks placed his hand on her shoulder. "The fleet is yours, Admiral." So bring our people home to the galaxy. Mercer nodded and activated the fleet-wide broadcast system that would reach every human ship and station across their hidden empire. All vessels and all stations. This is Admiral Kate Mercer. Her voice carried across light years in an instant. Operation Reclamation is now active, and all crews are ordered to report to battle stations immediately. She paused and felt the weight of history settling onto her shoulders. We launch in 6 hours. Across 1,000 hidden shipyards scattered through the dead reach. Engines that had waited in silence for 3 millennia roared to life ships that had been built in secret and crewed by generations who trained for a war they hoped would never come. Powered up there drives and prepared to move, the human fleet was waking up. And the galaxy was about to remember why they had become legends. Humanity was coming home. The human fleet emerged from the dead reach like a tide of steel and fire that had been building for 3,000 years. And the sight of it made Ambassador Lyra Sen weep with emotions she could not name. 12,000 warships moved in perfect formation through the darkness of space. Each one a monument to human engineering and human determination and human refusal to accept defeat. Carriers larger than cities drifted among sleek destroyers that bristled with weapons, while massive dreadnoughts formed the backbone of the formation with hulls thick enough to withstand the fury of stars. And at the center of this armada flew the flagship that humanity had named the Indomitable, a ship so vast that it cast shadows across the smaller vessels around it. Lyra watched from her diplomatic vessel as the fleet arranged itself into battle formation with a precision that seemed almost impossible. And she understood for the first time why her ancestors had feared these creatures so deeply. Captain Ben Cortez appeared on her view screen with a slight smile on his face. Ambassador Sen, the Council has voted to intervene, and Admiral Mercer has asked me to serve as your liaison during the campaign. Lyra could barely speak through the emotion that choked her throat. Thank you, Captain, and please tell your people that the Concord will never forget this kindness. Cortez nodded, and his smile faded into something more serious. We are not doing this for gratitude, Ambassador, because we are doing it because it is right. He paused. Now, I suggest you contact your government and tell them that help is on the way. The message Lyra sent back to the Galactic Concord spread like wildfire through every colony and station that still survived. And beings who had lost all hope suddenly found reason to believe again. The humans were real, and they were coming, and they had not forgotten how to fight on the bridge of the Indomitable. Admiral Kate Mercer studied the tactical display that showed the current positions of Keth volume swarm fleets throughout Concord space. The enemy had spread themselves across 100 star systems in their feeding frenzy, and this gave humanity an advantage that Mercer intended to exploit. Commander Sam Garcia, what is our time to the nearest Keth volume concentration? She asked without looking away from the display. Commander Garcia checked his instruments and ran the calculations quickly. Approximately 14 hours at maximum speed. Admiral, and the target system contains roughly 2 million enemy units surrounding the colony world of Vethkar. Mercer nodded slowly. 2 million is a good number for our first engagement. Garcia raised an eyebrow. Admiral, we are outnumbered nearly 200 to 1 in that system alone. Mercer turned to look at him with a calm expression that contained no fear. Commander, our ancestors fought against odds like these during the Exile Wars, and they won because they refused to accept that numbers determined victory. She returned her attention to the display. The Keth volume have never faced an enemy like us, and they have never encountered weapons like ours, and they have never met soldiers who would rather die than surrender. She began entering commands into the tactical computer. Today, they will learn why the galaxy turned us into legends. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect synchronization. And 14 hours later, They emerged into the Vethkar system like an avalanche descending upon an unsuspecting valley. The Tuttafali, the Titvandali, they emerged into the Vethkar system like an avalanche descending upon an unsuspecting valley. The Btere, Keth volume swarm detected them immediately, and 2 million biological ships turned to face this new threat with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Swarm Commander Rex Cole observed the approaching fleet from his command nexus and felt something that his species rarely experienced: curiosity. What species is this? He demanded of his tactical drones. Unknown, Commander. But their vessels matched descriptions from ancient records that we captured during the conquest of the Veluxi archives. Rexcal accessed those records and found references to a species called humans that had supposedly gone extinct thousands of years ago. Impossible, he declared. The humans were destroyed long before we began our expansion. The records indicate that their extinction was never confirmed. Commander, Rexcal dismissed this concern with a gesture of his primary appendage. It does not matter what they call themselves, because they are outnumbered, and they will be consumed like all the others. He issued commands to his swarm. All units advance and devour. 2 million Keth volume. Ships surged forward in a wave of chitin and biological weaponry that had crushed every fleet they had ever faced. And Rexcal waited for the familiar sight of enemy vessels breaking formation and fleeing in terror. The human fleet did not flee. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the swarm in a formation that Rexcal did not recognize. And before he could analyze their tactics, the lead human ships opened fire. The weapons were unlike anything the Keth volume had ever encountered. Plasma lances cut through chitin armor like it was paper, and kinetic rounds traveling at incredible velocities shattered hive ships into clouds of debris. Missiles launched from human carriers and burrowed deep into swarm vessels before detonating with enough force to destroy dozens of nearby ships in chain reactions of fire and death. What is happening? Rexcal demanded as his tactical display filled with icons representing destroyed units. Commander, we are sustaining losses at a rate that exceeds all projections, his tactical drone reported. Enemy weapons are significantly more powerful than anything in our database. Rexcal watched in disbelief as the human fleet carved through his swarm. Like a blade through soft flesh, he had commanded millions of ships in dozens of campaigns. And he had never seen anything move the way these humans moved. Their vessels worked together in perfect coordination, as if guided by a single mind. And their pilots flew without hesitation into the densest concentrations of swarm units. They were not just fighting, they were dancing with death and laughing at it. All units concentrate. Fire on their largest vessels. Rexcal ordered. Destroy their command. Ships and the others will fall. Thousands of swarm units converged on the Indomitable and unleashed everything they had against the massive human flagship. Admiral Mercer watched the incoming fire on her display and felt no fear. Activate defense grid, she ordered calmly. All batteries returned fire at will. The Indomitable came alive with weapons that had been designed specifically to counter swarm tactics. And point defense systems shot down incoming projectiles, while main batteries tore through enemy ships with devastating efficiency. Admiral, enemy reinforcements are arriving from the outer system, Commander Garcia reported. Approximately 1 million additional units, Mercer smiled. Signal the reserve fleet and tell Admiral Tony Rios that his people are cleared to engage from behind the main human formation. Another group of ships emerged from concealment. These were smaller and faster than the main fleet, crewed by volunteers who had requested the most dangerous assignments because they wanted to prove themselves worthy of their ancestors. They hit the Keth volume reinforcements like a hammer, Striking Glass Swarm Commander Vrexkull watched. His forces crumble around him and felt something he had never felt before: fear. How is this possible? He whispered. We outnumber them 10 to 1. His tactical drone had no answer on the surface of Vethkar. The surviving colonists looked up at the sky and saw fire raining down as Kethful ships burned and fell like shooting stars. They did not know who was fighting for them, but they knew that someone had finally come, and in the midst of the battle, surrounded by death and destruction, the human fleet continued to advance with the relentless determination of a species that had learned long ago that surrender was not an option. The legends had returned, and they were just getting started. The Battle of Vethkar raged for 12 hours as the human fleet systematically dismantled the Keth swarm that had once seemed invincible. And by the time the last enemy ship was destroyed, the humans had lost only 300 vessels, while the Keth had lost over 3 million. Swarm Commander Vrexkull barely escaped with his life in a damaged vessel that limped toward the nearest hive world with news that would shake the foundations of the Dominion. The Devourers had finally met something they could not consume. Admiral Kate Mercer stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and surveyed the aftermath of the battle with tired eyes that still burned with determination. Commander Garcia, what is the status of the colony below? Approximately 800 million survivors, Admiral, and they are requesting permission to send representatives to thank us personally. Mercer nodded slowly. Tell them we will receive their representatives. But first, we have work to do. She turned to the communication officer. Open a channel to all Concord frequencies. The officer made the connection, and Mercer knew that her voice would be heard by billions of beings across hundreds of star systems. This is Admiral Kate Mercer of the United Earth Defense Fleet speaking to all members of the Galactic Concord. She paused to gather her thoughts. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors retreated from this galaxy because the species who lived here showed us nothing but cruelty and hatred. Her voice remained calm but carried weight that pressed against the hearts of everyone who heard it. We could have stayed hidden forever and let you face this threat alone. And many of my people believed that was exactly what we should do. She looked out at the stars through the viewport. But humanity has always believed that we should be better than our worst impulses. And we have always believed that compassion is stronger than revenge. She straightened her shoulders. The Keth Dominion has declared war on all free species in this galaxy. And today humanity declares that we stand with you against them. Across the Concord, beings of every species listened in stunned silence. We do not ask for thanks, and we do not seek payment for what we do. Mercer continued. We ask only that you remember this moment and that you learn from it. Her voice hardened. The divisions and hatreds of the past nearly destroyed all of us. And if we are to survive what is coming, we must fight together as allies and not as strangers. She looked directly into the camera. Humanity has returned, and we will not rest until the Keth threat is ended. She paused one final time to the Keth Dominion. I say this. You came to this galaxy as conquerors, and you believed nothing could stop you. Her eyes blazed with a fire that had burned in human hearts since the first ancestor picked up a stone and refused to be prey. You were wrong. The message ended, and the galaxy erupted in reactions that ranged from disbelief to joy to fear in the great chamber of the Galactic Concord. Elder Morith of the Veluxi Collective wept openly as he heard the words he had hoped to hear for centuries. Ambassador Vethra stood beside him and placed a gentle hand on the old being's shoulder. They came. Vethra whispered. They actually came. Morith nodded through his tears. And now we must prove ourselves worthy of their forgiveness. The war that followed lasted 3 years and cost billions of lives on both sides. But the outcome was never truly in doubt once humanity joined the fight. The human fleet swept through Concord space like a cleansing fire, liberating colony after colony and destroying swarm concentration after swarm. Concentration with ruthless efficiency. Other species who had cowered in fear found their courage returning as they watched the humans fight. And soon Concord vessels began joining the human formations in battle. The alliance that formed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Selenary ships fought alongside human destroyers, while Veluxy carriers provided support for Thrin assault teams. And old hatreds that had festered for millennia began to heal in the crucible of shared struggle. Captain Ben Cortez led countless missions during those 3 years, and his name became legendary among the species he had once been taught to distrust. He fought beside Selenari warriors and shared meals with Veluxy commanders, and learned that the beings his ancestors had feared were not so different from humans after all. They loved their children and mourned their dead and dreamed of better futures. And they had simply been afraid of something they did not understand. Ambassador Lyra Sen traveled with the human fleet as a liaison between worlds, and she watched in wonder as the species she had sought out in desperation became the saviors of the galaxy. She also watched something else happen, something that she had not expected. She watched old wounds begin to heal. Humans who had grown up on stories of alien cruelty discovered that the descendants of their persecutors were capable of kindness and courage. Aliens who had believed humans were monsters discovered that these legendary creatures could be gentle and forgiving and surprisingly funny when they wanted to. Betty war against the Keth volume became something more than a fight for survival. It became the birth of something new. The final battle took place in the Keth volume home system, where the last remnants of the Dominion had gathered for a desperate last stand. Admiral Mercer commanded the combined fleet of humanity and the Concord, and she watched the tactical display with the calm certainty of someone who knew how this story would end. All vessels. This is Admiral Mercer. Her voice echoed across thousands of ships crewed by dozens of species. Today, we finish what we started. And today, we prove that the galaxy is stronger together than it ever was apart. She raised her hand. All batteries. Open fire. The combined fleet struck the Keth volume with overwhelming force. And in a single day, the Dominion that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was broken forever when the last enemy ship fell silent. A cheer rose up from every vessel in the fleet, regardless of species or origin. They had won. Admiral Mercer turned to Commander Garcia with a tired smile. Send a message to Earth and tell them it is done. She looked out at the stars that had been her home and her battlefield and her reason for living. Tell them humanity has come home. In the years that followed, the galaxy rebuilt itself on foundations of cooperation and mutual respect that had never existed before. Humanity did not return to hiding behind the borders of the Dead Reach, and instead they took their place among the stars as full members of a new galactic alliance that included every species that had fought beside them. Ambassador Lyra Sen eventually retired to a small world on the edge of human space, where she wrote her memoirs and watched the children of different species play together in fields of purple grass. She titled her book with words that she hoped would echo through history. They were legends once, and the final line of that book became the motto of the new alliance, carved into monuments on 1,000 worlds and taught to every child who looked up at the stars and wondered what was possible. We were silent, but we never forgot who we were, and now the universe will remember too. Humanity had returned from legend into reality, and the galaxy would never be the same. The war fleet had resounded across the void, and its echo would ring through eternity as a reminder that even the darkest silence could be broken by those who refused to give up hope. the humans had proven that legends could be real. And in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had never had before, a future worth believing in.